Kalen's talons clicked sharply against the durasteel grating of the observation deck. Below, the vast, skeletal arms of the orbital shipyard stretched into the void, cradling the last of the human fleet. He watched them with the cold disdain one might reserve for particularly ugly insects. The humans were a chaotic mess of organic flesh and unrefined technology, their vessels jury-rigged and inefficient. Yet, their sheer numbers were a pestilence that had forced the Talshar hegemony to the brink of a costly war. His own vessel, the Talvoth, a masterpiece of crystalline engineering and disciplined purpose, was here to oversee the final dismantling of this human infestation. He had been told they were cowards, prone to fleeing at the first sign of superior force. He believed it. It was logical. Self-preservation was the highest evolutionary imperative. He could not comprehend a species that would willingly throw away its own existence for a nebulous concept like comradeship. The very idea was biologically inefficient, a fatal flaw that nature should have already pruned from the genetic tree. He adjusted the intricate silver filigree of his ceremonial pauldron, a symbol of his high caste, and prepared to witness the inevitable, swift, and sterile conclusion of the engagement. The humans would break, they would scatter, and then they would be erased. It was the natural order of things. Alara didn't feel the cold of space, not really. She felt it as a pressure in her bones, a deep, resonant hum from the deck plates beneath her boots. She stood on the bridge of the USS Resolute, a ship that was, by all rights, a collection of spare parts and miracles. Her engineering crew was a family forged in the crucible of a dozen unwinnable battles, and they were all looking at her now. Their faces were grim, etched with exhaustion and a terrible, shared understanding. "They're locking on, Captain," her first mate, a man named Jorik whose arm was a tangled mess of synthetic muscle and scar tissue, said without looking up from his console. "The Talvoth has us in its targeting solution. They're not even bothering with shields." Alara nodded, her gaze fixed on the main view screen. There, bathed in the harsh light of a distant star, was the enemy vessel. It was beautiful in its terrifying symmetry, all sharp angles and gleaming surfaces. It looked like a shard of a god's crown, cold and untouchable. "They think we're running," Alara said, her voice steady. "They think we're afraid." She turned to her tactical officer, a young woman named Lena whose eyes held a haunted look. "Lena, give me everything you've got. Not to hurt them, just to make them see." Lena hesitated for a fraction of a second, her fingers hovering over the firing controls. "Captain, that's a suicide run." "No, Lena," Alara said, a sad smile touching her lips. "It's a hello." The first salvo from the Talvoth was a thing of brutal poetry. It was not a simple energy beam, but a focused cascade of crystalline shards, accelerated to a fraction of light speed. They ripped through the void, silent and invisible until they impacted the Resolute's hull. The ship shuddered, a deep, groaning protest. Alarms blared, but they were a familiar, almost comforting sound to Alara's crew. Damage reports flooded her console. Hull breaches on decks 4, 7, and 9. Life support failing in the Arboretum. She didn't flinch. "Evasive maneuvers, Jorik," she commanded. "Lena, keep their attention. Give them a light show." Jorik's hands flew across his console, the Resolute lurching and rolling, presenting a smaller target. Lena complied, unleashing a storm of plasma and shrapnel that was more of a nuisance than a threat. It was a distraction, a desperate, futile dance. Kalen watched from his command chair, his head tilted in avian curiosity. The human vessel was damaged, but it was still fighting. It was still there. It was illogical. They should have been vaporized. He keyed his comm, primary weapons, increase power. Target their command nexus. Erase the source of this resistance. The order was given, and the Talvoth prepared to deliver the final, crushing blow. The humans had their chance to flee. They had squandered it. Now, they would simply cease to be. "Captain, they're powering up their main cannon." Lena's voice was tight, laced with a terror she was trying to hide. "It's a spinal mount. We can't tank that." Alara's eyes scanned the tactical display, the complex web of the enemy ship's systems glowing a malevolent red. She saw the weapon charging, a terrifying spike of energy building at the Talvoth's core. She saw the power conduits feeding it, the capacitors brimming with destructive potential. It was a fortress, and they were a rock thrown at it. "All right, people," Elara said, her voice ringing with a calm that defied the situation. "You all know what this is. We've talked about it in the mess hall, in the engine rooms, in our sleep. We're not soldiers in the traditional sense. We're not conquerors. We're custodians." She walked over to the engineering station, where Chief O'Brien, a man with a prosthetic eye and a permanent scowl, was sweating over his console. "Chief, I need you to do something impossible." O'Brien grunted. "Name it, Captain. I've already done 2 impossibles today. I need you to reroute all auxiliary power from the life support systems, from the hydroponics, from everything non-essential, and dump it directly into the forward shields. Just for 10 seconds. A collective gasp went through the bridge. Jorik turned to stare at her. "Captain, that's everyone. We'll suffocate. Not if we do it right," Elara said, her gaze unwavering. "We won't suffocate, Jorik. We'll be buying time for the people in the escape pods. Now, Chief, do it." O'Brien looked at her, then at the faces of his crew, and finally back to his console. He nodded slowly. "Aye, Captain. Rerouting power. God help us all." Kalen watched the human ship on his view screen, his mind struggling to process the data. Their energy signatures were fluctuating wildly. Life support was failing. They were powering down their own life support. It made no sense. It was a biological paradox. A species that would willingly asphyxiate itself? It was unthinkable. He ordered a sensor sweep, desperate for a logical explanation. Was it a trick? A last-ditch effort to cloak themselves? The results came back, cold and unambiguous. Power rerouting. Life support systems offline. The humans were sacrificing their own lives to extend their shields. Kalen felt a flicker of something he had never experienced before. It was not fear, nor respect. It was a profound, unsettling confusion. It was a violation of everything he understood about life. He keyed his calm to the hegemony's high command, his voice tight. "This is Kalen. The humans are not fleeing. They are ceasing their own biological functions to power their defenses, requesting new directives. This behavior is outside all predictive models." The response was a crackle of static, then the cold, emotionless voice of his superior. "Engage them, Kalen. Destroy the anomaly. Their sacrifice is a sign of desperation, not strength. Execute the order." Kalen stared at the screen, the human vessel now surrounded by a shimmering, unstable energy field, its lights dimming as life support died. He gave the order, a knot of something ugly tightening in his gut. "Fire. Target their command bridge. Make it quick." The Resolute shuddered as the enemy fire impacted the reinforced shields. For 10 seconds, the shield held, a defiant bubble of light against the darkness. Inside, the air grew thin and stale. The lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into emergency red. Elara took a deep, ragged breath, her lungs burning. She could feel the cold of space seeping through the hull, a physical manifestation of the death they had chosen. 10 seconds, Chief, she rasped, her voice barely audible over the hiss of escaping air. "Bring life support back online. Now." O'Brien's fingers were a blur. Bringing it back online. But the hull breaches were losing atmosphere fast on decks 4 and 9. "Seal them," Elara ordered, her mind racing. "Lena, status on their weapons." "They're charging again," Lena whispered, her face pale in the dim light. "They're not fooled. They know we're weak." Elara knew it too. The shield was down, the ship was crippled, and the enemy was about to fire the killing blow. But they had done what they set out to do. The escape pods were away, a tiny swarm of insects heading for the safety of the nearby asteroid field. They had bought time. Now, it was time to make sure the enemy remembered them. "Jorik," she said, turning to her first mate, "I need you to do one last thing for me." Jorik looked at her, his eyes wide with understanding. "Anything, Captain. Open a channel to the Talvoth. Not a hailing frequency. Broadcast our bridge audio. Everything. All of it." The sound that erupted from the human comm channel was unlike anything Kalen had ever heard. It was not a battle cry, not a boast, not a plea for mercy. It was a cacophony of pain, of ragged breathing, of the groaning metal of a dying ship. But underneath it all, there was something else. A low, guttural chant. It was not words, not in any language Kalen understood. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated purpose. He listened, his avian ears picking up the individual voices. A woman's voice, strained but clear. Hold the line, people. For the kids. A man's voice, gasping. Tell my wife. Tell her I loved her. Another voice, a young one, filled with fear but resolve. I'm not scared. Not anymore. The chant grew louder, a rhythmic, pounding beat that seemed to sync with the ship's failing engines. It was a sound of defiance, of a species that was choosing to die together rather than live alone. Kalen felt a strange vibration in his chest, a dissonant hum that his crystalline physiology struggled to process. It was an emotional frequency, one his people had long since evolved past. It was unsettling. He ordered his comm officer to analyze the sound. The results were baffling. Sir, the acoustic pattern it's a form of synchronized biorhythm. It's strengthening them. Their vital signs are stabilizing, even as their life support fails. Kalen stared at the screen, at the human ship that was somehow defying death. He finally understood. This was not a weapon of technology. This was a weapon of the soul, and he had no idea how to fight it. Alara felt the chant building around her, a wave of sound and emotion that washed over her bridge crew. Jorik was leading it now, his deep voice booming, joining the chorus of pain and purpose. Lena, her face streaked with tears, was singing along, her voice thin but strong. Even O'Brien, the gruff old engineer, was humming the tune, his one good eye closed. It was a song of farewell, a song of love, a song of a family that was about to be torn apart but would never, ever break. The enemy cannon fired again, a brilliant lance of energy that streaked towards them. Alara closed her eyes, not in fear, but in acceptance. She thought of her own family, light years away, a memory she had held onto for years. She thought of the crew, the broken, beautiful, impossible people she had been honored to lead. She thought of the children in the escape pods, the future they had bought. For the children, she whispered, the words joining the chant. The impact came, not as a violent explosion, but as a slow, crushing pressure. The ship groaned, a sound of finality. The lights went out completely. The chant stopped. And then, there was only silence. In the cold, dark void, the USS Resolute was gone. Kalen sat in the silence of his command bridge, the echo of the human song still vibrating in his bones. The view screen showed nothing but debris and the cold, indifferent stars. The human ship was gone, erased. But the sound remained. It was imprinted on his senses, a haunting melody of sacrifice. He had ordered their destruction, yet he felt no victory. He felt only a profound and hollow emptiness. His comm officer spoke, his voice hesitant. Sir, we are detecting a phenomenon. From the debris field. Kalen turned, his interest piqued. What kind of phenomenon? It's a sound wave. A resonance. It's propagating through the debris, and it's getting stronger. On the screen, the shards of the Resolute's hull began to glow, not with energy, but with a soft, warm light. They began to vibrate, to hum with the same rhythm the humans had chanted. And then, they started to move. The shards, thousands of them, began to drift together, merging, reforming. They were not rebuilding the ship. They were forming something else. A colossal, jagged sphere of metal and light, pulsing with the rhythm of the human song. It was a monument. It was a weapon. It was a promise. Kalen stared, his avian mind struggling to comprehend the impossible truth. The humans were not dead. They had become the sound itself. The sphere of light and debris hung in the void, a silent, pulsing heartbeat where the USS Resolute had been. It was not a ship. It was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It was a presence. Kalen could feel it, a low thrumming that resonated through the Talvoth's very structure. It was the sound of the human chant, amplified and made manifest. It was the sound of their love, their loss, their defiance. It was a sound that demanded to be heard. His tactical officer's console was screaming. Sir, the sphere is emitting a focused energy burst. Not at us. It's a targeting signal. It's painting every Talshar vessel in the fleet. Kalen looked out at his fleet, the other crystalline ships arrayed around the shipyard. On their screens, the same targeting reticle bloomed, a red circle around each of them. It was not a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of memory. It was a promise that they would never be forgotten. What is it doing? Kalen demanded, his voice barely a whisper. The comm officer stared at his screen in disbelief. It's transmitting the audio. The entire bridge recording. The chant, the goodbyes, it's broadcasting it on every open channel. To the entire fleet. Kalen watched as the sound of the human sacrifice washed over his own ship, over his crew. He heard the ragged breathing, the whispered goodbyes, the powerful, unbreakable chorus. He heard the sound of a species that was willing to die for one another. And in that sound, he heard the truest, most terrifying power in the universe. The power to make an enemy understand, in the most brutal and beautiful way possible, exactly what they had destroyed. The sphere pulsed once more, a silent, final note in the symphony of loss, and then it dissolved into dust, leaving behind only the song and the echo of a lesson the Talshar would never forget.